Good morning. It is 8:36 a.m. morning time on Wednesday, July 2nd, 2025. My name is Mark Kulak, KULACZ. You won't see my name mentioned very often on Twitter, unless it's from an account. You'll notice, and I think Jonathan Cooey was who we have to thank for this, that there are tricks that can be played on places like Twitter and on Substack, where you'll see certain accounts that are, paid influencers, however you want to classify them, whatever words you want to use, where some of their tweets will get 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 impressions. And you'll think that everything that they say is just seen by everyone. And then they'll say something derogatory about you. And when they do, you'll notice that only 200 people see it. So there's ways, and I don't know if it's because they can control it, or I wonder if there's a little flag, a setting that they can choose to say, hey, I want this one to get a lot and this one not to get a lot. And it's important to notice the numbers, the metrics of how many people actually see a tweet could be totally fabricated themselves. But it gets a little trickier to play with some of those numbers, right? Because if a lot of people respond to something that has very few views, it just won't make sense. So I suspect that they just kind of just mask certain things. But it's important to notice this behavior because it's very easy to get baited into thinking that some derogatory statement will be seen by a lot of people, and then thus it's worth investing a lot of time into responding to that statement. So messages that go onto my videos that say something derogatory or negative or inflammatory, whatever, get seen by very few people. So my investment in those is minimal. What I would like to see is if someone wants to say something negative, say it on Joe Rogan or Tucker Carlson. Okay. So anyways, I'm encouraging people, don't take the bait. Don't waste your time on messages and inflammatory remarks in areas that don't mean anything. If someone really wants to invest the time, if they really think it's important to say something bad, Say it in a form that a lot of people will see it, right? For example, there's a lot of people who don't like Trump, so I hear. And yes, they'll complain, to each other. They'll complain at parties, but they'll actually go out and do street protests. They will put up billboards. They'll pay for TV ads. They hate him so much. And I'm not saying that they should or they shouldn't or whatever. The point, though, is that if you really, really don't like somebody and if you want to spend the time, why not spend a little money and then respond in a way that a lot of other people go, wow, that person really isn't worth liking. Otherwise, it's just done in a way to upset someone and waste their time. Anyways, the topic of today, what I call today's show, is Kash Patel, Tucker Carlson, blame only China for opioids in the United States of America, ignore India. And I think a good starting point is this recent interview. You'd be surprised that this is where it goes so fast. The Tucker Carlson interview with RFK Jr. Now, why? Why on a video that's titled Declassifying Kennedy Files, a video interviewing RFK Jr., and an interview about autism, why would the first minute be opioids in China? Now, maybe Tucker Carlson's selling a new body deodorant or something. I don't know. These podcasters waste a lot of time selling you things. It's amazing. Why does Tucker Carlson, he's a multimillionaire, why does he need to clear time on his schedule and his interviews? Do you really think that I would sell ready-to-eat meals or something like that? Or gold, or, I don't know, sheepskin? I don't know what the hell knows. If I had RFK Jr. on for an interview, which absolutely won't happen, I guarantee you, even if I tried. There is a video of me asking him some questions. Why would I waste time? I mean, it's so stupid. You're wasting people's time. But so let's watch the first minute or two. Well, let's watch what Tucker Carlson says. Because I've been saying most people won't talk about the drug epidemic. They won't put it in the context. Let's listen to what he says, and then let's assess why did he say that here? Because him planting or being told to say this here at the beginning of this interview, and then I believe never mention it again, is, I'm not sure Carlson's aware of it, but at some point you have to go, I think he's aware of it, is one of the sickest things I've ever seen. And I'll tell you why.
We haven't heard a lot about. The Chinese mafia is exploiting rural America to create a drug empire. This is not available on cable news. The network's not telling you about this, but it's totally real. Communist-affiliated drug gangs destroying parts of the United States, the parts that Washington ignores, to sell drugs, laundering money, and building a black market network inside this country's most beautiful but least served areas. We've got a brand new documentary on this. It's called High Crimes, the Chinese Mafia Takeover of Rural America. It's available now on tuckercarlson.com. It's excellent. The purchase of churches and schools to aid the operation, the jerry-rigging of power boxes to steal electricity, foreign pesticides, collusion with the Mexican cartels. It's unbelievable. By the way, one of the drug houses is like walking distance from my house. I didn't know that. It's a layered and fascinating story. Head to tuckercarlson.com to watch now. We think you'll love it.
Okay, so devil's advocate would be maybe this just happened to be another new episode that he did. So maybe a show, for each episode you highlight the upcoming episode or previous episode. Devil's advocate, okay? But at some point you have to go, okay, even the devil is going to get tired advocating to be this evil. Going to get exhausted after a while. The reality is that in the year 1999, which is 25, 26 years ago, the total number of drug overdose deaths in the United States of America of all drug overdose types was 19,000 people a year. 19,000 people with at that time we had 2.5 million people probably or so dying each year. That's a lot of people. And a lot of those deaths tended to be younger people. I don't mean to be joking, but you don't see many people who are 78 years old suddenly taking up a heroin addiction and then dying at a average age. It's usually young people. At least that much has been, for the most part, well represented in Hollywood movies. And in fact, there were movies at the time in the 1990s, early 2000s that would showcase the struggle of addiction. Sometimes they would glamorize it or not represent it perfectly, but at least people knew it was happening. At least people knew it was happening. Maybe they didn't really understand the nature of addiction that well, but at least they knew it was happening. And that number in around 2002 or 3 was maybe crept up to 21,000 or 22,000 people a year. So it was getting worse. A little bit better than it was in the 1980s, but it was getting worse. Note that at the worst number up until then of fatal drug overdoses a year, I don't think ever exceeded 40,000, which is horrible, but just put that into perspective. The United States had a war on drugs when it was 35 or 38,000 people dying a year of drug overdoses back in the 1980s. And then slowly that number got higher and higher throughout the 2000s and then 2000 teens. It was close to 60,000 a year. It was at record level all times, even population adjusted during the Obama administration. I'm not blaming Obama for that, by the way. I'm not sure exactly how connected Barack Obama was to the drug overdose crisis in the United States of America. I'm not someone, I despise people that show picture of Barack Obama with flies on his head and suggest that he's some sort of serpent demon or whatever. I despise that shit. I automatically block anyone who retweets any of those on Twitter or shares pictures like that. But it was now 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, 60,000. Now, these are not cumulative. It's not as if 40,000 people died in 2000, let's just say 8. And then 8 more thousand people died, which means now 48,000 people died total over the course of time the next year. No. That's 30,000 one year, then an additional 33,000 the next year, then an additional 34,000 the next year, then an additional 38,000 the next year, and so on and so forth. These are not cumulative. These are each year starting from 0. So knowing that the total number of drug overdoses a year, and mostly impacting young people, was around 19,000 people a year in the year 2000 and 2001, note that number in the year 2017, 18, we are now in the 60 to 70,000 a year range. A statement could be made that the numbers went down during Trump, but going from the all-time record at the beginning of the Trump administration down to another second highest number is not really an improvement as far as I'm concerned. They should be going back down to the awful numbers of 19,000 a year, but they weren't. Anyways, in the year 2000, that number was, I believe, 78,000 total drug overdose deaths. Now, breaking that down, some people die of benzodiazepine. Some people die of benzos. Some people die of cocaine and methamphetamines. There's a few other lesser known categories in there, and even I'm not aware of all the different types of drugs which are abused and how they're abused, in spite of our adult son dying in 2022. But the big one is opioids. And opioids is, I'm sure it's short for another word, but painkillers, morphine, heroin, etc. And starting in the 1990s, there was a new type of synthesized painkiller combined with acetaminophen or something else. And these were, one brand name would be oxycodone, and it was sold by a company called Purdue Pharma. and they were being prescribed more and more often, and nurses and doctors were encouraged to be very sympathetic, empathetic to people who had symptoms of pain. So more and more people were taking synthetic opioids and becoming addicted to painkillers during the 1990s and early 2000s. Now, there's other types of opioids which are more and more synthesized. And I'm not even sure that some of them even involve any poppy plants at all. These are chemicals which eventually make products known as fentanyl or carfentanil. And these are opioids which are so powerful that an amount the size of a salt crystal or a couple of salt crystals could kill somebody because they're just so powerful. But they're very cheap. They're also used for hospice care, end of life, even executions use some of these types of chemicals. And drug dealers, as we are told, because of the cost of heroin, would sometimes make their own batches. They would water fentanyl down with something else to have a less expensive thing to sell, but they could still charge the same amount, and it could be more profitable. Not to mention, people would become addicted to pain medicines, and sometimes the doctors would cut them off, or sometimes the people would run out of money because they weren't working anymore. Who knows? Anyways, once you can no longer get pain meds, like real prescription-grade oxycodone, you then go to a street drug dealer. And there you can get something illegally, which may actually be even more powerful. In fact, some addicts actually will get prescriptions for oxycodone, real, branded, original, from the factory, prescription strength, and then sell it because it's worth so much money, and use it to get twice as much effective, drug through heroin, because you can actually get more kick from heroin for the dollar than you get oxycodone. I think it's known that there's risk when you go with heroin, morphine, whatever's available on the street, than the prescription pills. So, with all this said, as these numbers escalated, and then these numbers exploded even further in 2020, 21, 22, the total number of drug overdoses crept up to almost 120,000 a year in 2022. And we weren't having more people dying every year of cocaine. All of the growth came in opioids. All of it. All of it. Virtually all of it. And another disturbing factor is that if someone were to die of multiple drugs at the same time, cocaine, opioids, something called an 8-ball, okay? Usually, if they will either say multiple substances, or usually the preference is to write it down as cocaine, because there's a lot of money in trafficking and the trafficking control of cocaine. So the total percentages of drug overdose deaths from opioids, I think, is actually realistically higher. Not many people die of cocaine overdoses. It happens. You can totally die from a cocaine overdose. You can drive yourself crazy by using too much cocaine and other amphetamines. But it's expensive and it's difficult, okay? Not to mention, a lot of cocaine overdoses tend to be people who are older, all right? So there's that as well. So as the number is reaching 120,000 drug overdose deaths the year 2022, which is almost effectively 6 times the amount it was in the year 1999. Most of these drug overdose deaths are people, teenagers, 20s and 30 years old. I've done videos walking through fields of signboards of pictures of people who died, and you can tell they are all relatively young Americans. Meaning that if in the year 2022, the United States of America had about 3 million deaths, and if we have 3 million, 3.2 million deaths overall, all people, and if we had 120,000 deaths from drug overdoses, that means in the year 2022, the United States of America, 1 out of every 30 people that died of a drug overdose. That is absurd. That's absurd. And it was that way for 21. Effectively, realistically, it was that way for 5 years in a row. Okay. And these numbers these deaths are people who are younger. And you could do some very simple math, okay? If the average age of death is 78, and if you add, if you say 30 people died at age 78, and if you add one more death in there of someone who dies at age 25, you'll notice that life expectancy drops a lot. So life expectancy dropped under COVID predominantly because of the drug overdoses. Now, there are people who died of potentially these new generation of vaccines, tumors, other neurological conditions. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank right now. Who are in their 40s and 50s and 60s. People who should have had another 20, 30, 40 years to live. Those deaths, in absence of anything else, would have also had an impact on overall life expectancy for those years in the United States of America. However, many people who died of COVID were actually elderly people who were already over the age of 80. So in other words, in spite of the absolutely catastrophic tragedy of losing so many people in their 40s and 50s, being killed by protocols, being killed by these new generation of vaccines, in spite of that, life expectancy still would have gone up overall at the nation level because so many very elderly people were being killed in hospitals or being killed with protocols. It was only the drug epidemic and the very high number of young people dying, teens, 20s, and 30s, of drug overdoses that dragged overall life expectancy down. And that lowering of overall life expectancy is a necessary part of the deadly novel virus narrative. It cannot exist. The narrative falls apart without data, which is provided by the drug epidemic. In matter of fact, there never would have been at least as much or at all at any approval for the new generation vaccines if the data suggested it was only extremely old people that were being targeted. If you have a loved one that died at age 40 of the mRNA vaccine, the reason why they were probably compelled or ordered to take it is because some other asshole was using drug overdose deaths as part of the mystery, as part of this compilation to suggest we had a deadly novel virus that made taking an experimental vaccine a good idea. So Robert F. Kennedy Jr., as the head of the Health and Human Services, as the head of Children's Health Defense, he's had 5 years to absorb how many young people were dying, to absorb how many, if you're supposed to defend young people, hundreds of thousands of young children, infants in some cases, had their parents dying from drug overdoses. Children's Health Defense includes young parents being killed. So this is an interview about autism, and this is going to be an interview that we're going to talk about the mRNA vaccines and everything else. We're going to talk to RFK Jr., okay? And the very first minute is focused on, hey, opioid epidemic, China. China opioid epidemic. Look at all these poor, shirtless, monstrous Chinese people running around rural America distributing opioids. Now, no doubt, China has been a source of opioids. Let's watch the first minute again. Let's embrace the first minute again.
Well, here's a story you probably haven't heard a lot about. The Chinese mafia is exploiting rural America to create a drug empire. This is not available on cable news. The network's not telling you about this, but it's totally real. Communist-affiliated drug gangs destroying parts of the United States, the parts that Washington ignores, to sell drugs, laundering money, and building a black market network inside this country's most beautiful but least served areas. We've got a brand new documentary on this. It's called High Crimes, the Chinese Mafia Takeover of Rural America.
Now, I mean, I don't know every single drug dealer in the United States of America. I don't know every single drug route. I don't know the source of every single quantity of fentanyl. I don't know. I do know that the person that our adult son was with when he died was Pakistani. They weren't Chinese. Now, we also have a director of the FBI, Kash Patel, who's Indian ethnically, but family's from Uganda, who's saying it's all China. If it is all China, then it is all China. I don't care. But the point, though, is that, wait. I hear India for thousands of years has had a little bit of a riff with China. And we have an Indian FBI director, Kash Patel, who's saying it's all China. Well, if it really is all China, then it is what it is. I wouldn't bring it up. By the way, we also, the subcommittee in the United States Congress that's responsible for addressing and handling the Chinese Communist Party is an Indian-born man, Raja Krishnamurthy. That's interesting. So an Indian-born man is heading the subcommittee in the United States Congress regarding the Chinese Communist Party. An awful lot of people from India who seem to be controlling how the United States should be thinking about China. Oh, and I also showed you a 60 Minutes show from 2015, 16, where they were planting the seeds that you could just order fentanyl from China. That's it. You just go online, get it on the dark internet. China. With that said, let us look at this. January 2020, fentanyl flowed to the United States from the DEA. Now, this is Donald Trump's DEA in the year 2020. The DEA intelligence report. Can I make this full screen here? Fentanyl flowed to the United States in January 2020. No, they have a flag of China and a flag of India there. Just saying. Executive summary. While the flow of fentanyl to the United States in 2019 is more diverse compared to the start of the fentanyl crisis in 2014, with new source countries and new transit countries emerging as significant trafficking nodes. This is exasperating the already multifaceted fentanyl crisis by introducing additional source countries into the global supply chain of fentanyl, fentanyl-related substances, and fentanyl precursors. Further, this complicates law enforcement operations and policy efforts to stem the flow of fentanyl into the United States. While Mexico and China are the primary source countries for fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances trafficked directly to the United States, India is emerging as a source for finished fentanyl powder and fentanyl precursor chemicals. So it's already known in 2019 that India is on the rise and China is decreasing. I'm going to repeat. In 2019, it's already known that the trend is for China to have less. And that's the truth. China was cutting down. China was controlling. Definitely not 100%, but they were definitely cracking down. Look, China needs trade from the United States. That's the truth. They need food and they need trade from the United States. Not to mention, China is heading for a demographic catastrophe where half of their population is going to be gone by the end of this century. It doesn't really serve China well to mass murder people in the United States. It doesn't. They have nothing to gain from it other than tariffs, anger, hostility. I remind you, I grew up in the city of Bridgeport, Connecticut, a city which was an industrial city, which was impacted like many other Rust Belt areas of the United States of America, losing manufacturing. I remind you how frustrated I was, and sometimes still am, that if I want to buy tools, I have to go to Harbor Freight, and most stuff comes from China. Okay. However, it's not China's fault that the United States did such a bad job at prioritizing manufacturing in its own nation. American politicians sold us out. That's the truth. Did China undercut it? Yeah, but you know what? China's undercutting never would have worked if it wasn't for traitorous American politicians and leaders selling out the United States and not prioritizing America's own citizens. That's the truth. If you have a beautiful lawn and if you see crabgrass coming in, you can yell at the crabgrass all day long. However, crabgrass can't grow if you keep a healthy lawn. So at some point, it's your own damn fault if you see too much crabgrass in your lawn. It means you haven't seeded properly. You haven't put down the pre-emergent. You've been cutting it too short. It's your fault. Crabgrass is just doing what it's doing. Don't be mad at the crabgrass. I don't mean to compare China to crabgrass, but you know what I'm trying to say. So India is emerging. And as a matter of fact, I've also heard this mentioned several times where India has said, I shouldn't say India as if it's one voice, but organizations in India have said, because of export restrictions on India fentanyl gets shipped to the United States through China. I've heard this said before. Right now, I suspect more than half of the fentanyl actually comes from India. And it was already on a trend for India to perhaps exceed China, and this was known in 2019. And here we are, 5-6 years later, and we just had more people die of opioids and fentanyl than we had probably the previous 30 to 40 years. And it's the primary reason why we had life expectancy go down in the United States of America. And that life expectancy drop being caused by drug overdoses is not being mentioned by anybody of relevance. More disturbing. So we have an Indian man running the National Institutes of Health, born in India. We have an Indian man from India running the biologics evaluation, both being promoted by Indian broadcasters, Persian, but albeit, and many of these, of course, are supported by Robert Malone, Dr. Robert Malone, who I actually think is part Indian. One of the reasons why he doesn't talk about his family tree, and he's so well supported by Indra Verma, and worked with Vical and so on and so forth. So we have the National Institutes of Health and all of these organizations, which are predominantly Indian right now. And I don't mean American-born. Keep in mind, United States population is 1.6%, I think, Indian. Asian Indian. Now, many Indians are actually pretty well educated. So I would actually expect to see a higher than 1.6% representation in the United States government of the Indian population. However, at some point you go, hey, that doesn't make any sense. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I think, is the only person there that was born in the United States. And he's effectively run by Robert Malone. So you almost just have to put Robert Malone's face over RFK Jr. And none of them are willing to say that there's an opioid epidemic that is the main reason why life expectancy went down. Matter of fact, Jayanta Bhattacharya has been saying that the life expectancy drop is due to health. Well, it is, of course, right? It's due to what? Nutrition, diet, exercise, glyphosates, etc., etc., lifestyle. And those things definitely haven't been helping. Maybe he also will open up the door to maybe it was a rushed mRNA vaccine. Matter of fact, Marty Makary, who's not Indian, he's Egyptian, but he was born in England, is willing to also throw that out there. That, it's the mRNA vaccines. Why won't they just say that life expectancy went down from a drug epidemic? Not to mention, there's the Indian man running the FBI, and now there's Tucker Carlson, who are saying it's all China. It's definitely China. It's only China. Now, I would actually be more likely to believe this storyline that it's all China if we had several Chinese nationals running the United States Health Institutes who were all colluding with each other to deny the existence of the drug epidemic or to suggest that life expectancy was going down because of diet and glyphosates and everything else. Because that would look like collusion. However, we have multiple people running the National Health Institutes from the longtime, well-established mortal enemy of China, either saying the opioid epidemic is only from China, and running the FBI as well, and at the same time ignoring the opioid epidemic's impact on overall health in the United States of America, and even worse, ignoring what the DEA knew in 2019 was that the trend was that India is going to overtake China as far as fentanyl sourcing. And as a matter of fact, a lot of fentanyl that comes through China is actually also from India. This looks like one of the most grotesque, horrible conspiracies in the history of the United States of America. Oh, and we also have Sri Lankan nationals married into the family of Lee Meng-yen. You know, the Chinese girl who was, I think, born and raised in the United States of America. It's all an act to say it was the Chinese Communist Party. Now, again, what's in it for me? I have no reason to stand up for any foreign country. I just want Americans looking out for America, and I want people in other countries looking out for themselves as well. That's all. However, knowing that I got into this fight because of the drug epidemic, knowing how unsuccessful I was at getting people to stay on track, how many people around me got distracted with everything else. They wanted people focused on anything and anything else other than this drug epidemic, and it did get worse. And it did make the pandemic narrative possible. And the reality is that I don't see China in the United States government running offices. I don't see China running the National Institutes of Health. I don't see China running the FBI saying that it's all India. That's the facts. And I know that the people that were with our adult son when he died were not Chinese. They were Indian and Pakistani. So now you know why it is so revolting that Tucker Carlson, on an interview where he's going to be talking about Mr. Autism, Mr. Pandemic Narrative, RFK Jr., Mr. The Wuhan Cover-Up Book, RFK Jr., is how awful it is that Tucker Carlson chose to, or was directed to, spend his first minute effectively blaming this drug epidemic on China and only China, and don't look anywhere else. People, I'm doing more than just saying that this drug epidemic is some accident. I believe that it was intentionally allowed, intentionally engineered, and I think it's possible that this non-existent, the FBI is out to lunch, they're taking time off, they're not really doing anything anymore. I believe it's possible that agencies within the United States of America actually knowingly facilitated lethally laced drugs on the streets of the United States of America, even targeting them to particular demographics as part of creating the narrative and sculpting the demographics of the United States of America. I don't think India, as much as it sounds like I'm pointing the finger in a particular way, India, or if they did want to do it, China, could not have pulled this off if we had Americans loving Americans, looking out for Americans, regardless of their race or age or religion or political disposition. It's not them. However, other countries have been used. And it is noteworthy, though, that politically, India is gaining an enormous quantity of political capital in the United States of America. It is noteworthy. It is what it is. So, that's my morning show. It's upsetting stuff. You can still find the DEA report 2019 that shows that they knew all this was going to happen. Unfortunately, everyone wanted to talk about Epstein and all kinds of other goofy stuff. Everyone wanted to talk. How many Steve Bannon journalists, Steve Bannon, of course, funded Li Meng Yan, started off COVID-19 talking about the China 1,000 Talents program, China this, China that. Make a list. You'll notice an interesting pattern. All right, guys. Thank you. Take care. That's my morning kickoff. Love you guys very much. Thank you for listening. God bless.